When nations fracture, the first loss is it's rarely land or resources. It's the loss of unity. It's the unraveling of that, that shared constitutional agreement that holds the whole structure together.
Right.
And today, we are diving into a period of, well, extreme vulnerability.
Yeah.
The moment immediately following the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
It was more than just a political transition. It was an existential shock. I mean, you have to imagine a state barely 10 years old suddenly facing this simultaneous withdrawal of allegiance from tribes all across the Arabian Peninsula.
And these weren't just any tribes.
No, these were groups who had only recently accepted Islam, and now they were placing the entire nascent structure on the brink of absolute collapse.
And in that moment, the weight of the entire constitutional future of the Ummah fell onto the shoulders of one man, Abu Bakr As-Siddiq. May Allah be pleased with him. What's so compelling about his leadership during this crisis, and we know it historically as the Wars of Apostasy or the Ridda Wars, is that he stood defending not his personal authority.
No, not at all.
But the legal continuity of the state.
He fundamentally defined his role as a constitutional defender. The sources make it so clear. His leadership was rooted in this understanding of responsibility before Allah.
And what did that mean, practically?
It translated politically into adherence to established law, not seeking, privilege before men, which would have meant political compromise, cutting deals. That distinction is the engine driving every single decision we're analyzing today.
Precisely. And this deep dive is laser-focused on a really critical sequence of decisions, cases 9 through 16, which outline how he applied these constitutional principles, law, consultation, and ethics to prevent fragmentation.
We are essentially mapping the blueprint for how legal unity and faith unity were preserved when the political environment was just screaming for chaos.
So our mission here is to analyze these decisions not as, simple historical battles.
Right. Not just military history.
But as constitutional precedents. Precedents that established a framework for national cohesion and legal stability that, it lasts far beyond his lifetime.
It really does.
Okay, let's unpack this monumental task. We have to start with case 9, the crisis of fragmented Arabia. We really need to set the stage for exactly what these tribes were doing that threatened the state so profoundly.
The situation was nuanced. It's important to get that. This wasn't always a simple, outright rejection of Islam.
So they weren't all just saying, we're not Muslims anymore.
Not all of them, no. After the Prophet's passing, many tribes sought a kind of compromise. They would maintain their allegiance to the faith, they would pray, they would fast, but they flatly refused obedience to the central political state in Medina.
Okay, so if they're still practicing the religion, what was the specific constitutional breaking point? Was it just a matter of sovereignty, of them wanting to rule themselves?
It centered on zakat, the obligatory charity.
A tax.
Well, yes, but it was more than a tax. Many tribes argued, and perhaps sincerely, that the zakat payment was a personalized religious pledge or a treaty they had made with the Prophet, peace be upon him, specifically.
Ah, so they're saying the contract was with him, and now that he's gone.
The obligation is over, exactly. So by withholding zakat, they were attempting to declare economic and political independence while, in their minds, retaining their religious identity.
I'm curious how refusing to pay zakat legally translated into an existential crisis for the state. If it's just a tax, even a critical one, why was it worth fighting a war over?
Because zakat wasn't just charity, and it wasn't just a tax. It was the entire operational revenue for the nascent state.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. It funded the defense of Medina, it maintained the centralized welfare system, and crucially, it paid the state officials, the governors, the tax collectors. Refusing zakat was synonymous with defunding the state apparatus entirely.
So, they were essentially saying, we like the ideology, we'll keep the prayers, but we are seizing control of the state's budget and denying Medina the capacity to govern.
That's it, exactly. And Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, recognized this immediately. He declared this action not mere political dissent or a theological misunderstanding. He defined it constitutionally as a rebellion.
A rebellion, that's a very specific legal term.
It is. By refusing obedience to the central authority regarding a mandated law, zakat, they were actively and intentionally severing the constitutional relationship that defined the Ummah as a single-body politic governed by a shared legal framework.
That distinction changes everything, doesn't it? It reframes the whole conflict from, are you following the religion properly, to, Are you respecting the foundational legal structure of the nation?
Absolutely. The profound legal lesson here, and it's a timeless one, is that a nation's constitutional unity isn't sustained merely by shared ideology. It has to be sustained by adherence to its constitution in action.
In action.
Particularly the centralized legal and fiscal mechanisms. If the central legal structure, in this case, the caliphate enforcing zakat, is refused by local entities, the nation, as a unified legal entity, ceases to exist.
That principle has, it has massive modern relevance when we think about concepts of federal integrity and national cohesion.
Of course.
We see in so many modern democracies this ongoing tension, right?
Huh.
Between localized governance and the necessity of a central authority, especially when it comes to collecting revenue and national security.
And what's fascinating here is that the precedent established by Abu Bakr argues that even if local entities agree on the overall guiding philosophy, say, a modern state agreeing on democracy.
Right, we all agree on the big picture.
Refusal to adhere to the central legal structure that binds the federation, like federal taxes or national defense mandates, constitutes an existential threat. You simply cannot sustain a nation where local provinces unilaterally decide which central laws are optional. That leads to unavoidable political fragmentation.
It's the end of the nation-state. If the Constitution is applied arbitrarily or optionally, then by definition, you no longer have a unified nation. You just have a collection of independent units waiting for the first strongman to come along and consolidate power by force.
And this realization, this crucial distinction, moves us directly into Case 10,
Okay.
defining that critical boundary between acceptable dissent and outright rebellion.
This is such a crucial area of nuance, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you have this massive discontent, how did the caliph manage to distinguish between legitimate verbal opposition, people being unhappy with his leadership, for instance, and actual armed insurrection?
He relied on a clear, objective legal and military standard. He was, by all accounts, remarkably tolerant of verbal opposition.
So people can complain.
People could voice doubts about the future, they could argue the merits of a policy, they could express unhappiness with the new leadership arrangement. That was considered legitimate political speech within the constitutional framework.
So freedom of opinion was protected even during a crisis of this magnitude.
Yes. But swift, firm action was deployed the moment that dissent crossed the line into active military insurrection.
And what was that line?
The moment it transitioned into armed bands refusing civil order and, most critically, refusing the fundamental legal obligations of the state.
So the boundary was drawn at the point where disagreement shifted from being about policy to undermining the state's capacity to function.
That is the core legal lesson for any enduring state. Freedom of opinion must be protected, but that freedom ends where deliberate action threatens civil order. In every stable constitutional system, there has to be a defined threshold where political dissent, no matter how passionate, stops, and seditious action aimed at overturning the functioning legal state begins.
And if we look at that through a modern lens, this is essentially the debate over sedition and treason. When does protest become an action that legally endangers the government's existence?
Exactly.
And Abu Bakr defined it as the combination of two things: organized armed resistance and the refusal of central legal duties like zakat.
It raises such an important constitutional question, one that every state has to grapple with. How does a state protect itself without becoming tyrannical? And he answered that by saying the state can tolerate all internal criticism, but it cannot tolerate the destruction of its legal and fiscal infrastructure.
That need for an intact infrastructure, that brings us directly to Case 12.
Yeah.
The principle of legal continuity. This is where he really enforced the principle that the system survives the person.
His central stabilizing legal argument was so powerful in its simplicity, he just said. The obligations established by the Prophet, peace be upon him, remain binding. The death of the physical ruler does not, under any circumstances, nullify the established law of the land.
Let's delve deeper into the specific examples you mentioned, zakat and obedience to lawful authority. Why were these the twin pillars he chose to fight for? Why not something else?
Because they were the threads holding the very fabric of the state together. Zakat, as we said, was the financial lifeblood. Refusal meant economic collapse.
And obedience.
Obedience to lawful authority was the political lifeblood. Refusal meant administrative anarchy. To suspend these fundamental obligations based on emotional claims, or the simple fact of new leadership, would have been to endorse legal anarchy.
So he was establishing this foundational legal concept that the Constitution The established framework of rights and obligations survives beyond the individual who first established it or enforced it.
Precisely. The system is permanent, the leaders are temporary.
That's the cornerstone of all constitutional theory, isn't it?
It has to be. Think about modern continuity of government. When a presidential administration changes, the vast body of federal law, the tax code, the treaties, they don't just vanish. The new leader inherits a legal framework and is bound by it.
Right.
This predictable transition and continuity is what prevents a vacuum of authority or mass lawlessness every time a leader leaves office.
It provides stability. It assures the citizens that their lives, their commerce, won't be interrupted by every single political succession. If Abu Bakr had conceded the zakat argument,
the precedent would have been catastrophic.
every subsequent caliph would have faced a fresh constitutional crisis upon assuming office, with tribes selectively opting in or out of the state structure whenever they felt like it.
And that fragility would have guaranteed the state's eventual collapse, probably at the hands of external enemies who were watching very, very closely.
Like who?
The Byzantine and Persian empires, for example, they were always looking for weakness on the Arabian frontier. This would have been an open invitation.
This incredible commitment to legal principle, even in the face of immense danger, this is what defines Case 11, doesn't it? Constitutional duty over political fear. The companions must have been absolutely terrified.
Terrified is an understatement. The state was weak, the treasury was low, they were surrounded by enemies, both internal and external.
So what were they telling him to do?
Senior companions, veterans of years of warfare, were urging him to adopt political expediency, to compromise on zakat for the moment, to delay military action, to focus only on the most severe internal threats. They were arguing for caution to save the fledgling state from a brutal civil war.
Wait, but wasn't pursuing a rope precisely a political fear? Wasn't the fear that his uncompromising stance would just unite all his enemies against him? Why wasn't he swayed by that very rational argument of avoiding bloodshed?
That's where his constitutional leadership shines. The companions saw the immediate political risk civil war. Abu Bakr saw the long-term constitutional risk systemic collapse.
So a different kind of risk.
A deeper one. If he compromised on zakat, even for a single day, he would be acknowledging that the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, had fundamentally weakened the law itself. That concession would be seen as a victory by every future faction seeking to dismantle the state.
So his firmness was a defense mechanism for the Constitution itself. It wasn't really an aggressive act of war.
Exactly. He remained utterly resolute, stating that his constitutional duty to enforce the established law outweighed any political fear or tactical hesitation. This is the moment where legal principle became a matter of national security.
And we absolutely have to detail that iconic quote because it's the perfect encapsulation of this entire principle.
His powerful statement was, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, "Even if they withhold a rope they used to give in zakat, I will fight them for it."
A rope.
A rope. You have to visualize this. He wasn't valuing the physical rope. He was emphasizing that the principle of universal legal enforcement must be absolute. Whether it's the largest shipment of gold or the smallest rope used to tie a camel for zakat collection, the law must be enforced consistently, without exception.
The lesson is undeniable. Upholding the Constitution sometimes demands standing alone. It demands it even when the decision is politically unpopular, resource-intensive, or genuinely dangerous.
Right.
It demands consistency in enforcing the law, even down to the smallest detail.
A constitutional leader views the law as a sacred foundational promise. A temporary politician views the law as a flexible tool for maintaining power. Abu Bakr's refusal to compromise, even to avoid bloodshed, prevented the permanent fracturing of the legal system. Political expediency would have achieved short-term peace, but it would have guaranteed the long-term dissolution of the Ummah.
Okay, so having established the legal right to act, the constitutional necessity of the action, and this unwavering commitment to principle, the next crucial step was defining the process of that action.
Yes.
This moves us into part 2, exploring how internal deliberation reinforces external legitimacy. This is case 13. Consultation before action, or shura.
This is such a vital counterpoint to the idea that his firmness was dictatorial. Before committing the state to military campaigns against the rebellious tribes, he didn't rely on unilateral executive power. He held broad, structured consultation with the most prominent companions.
What was the real substance of that deliberation? Was it merely an information briefing, here's what we're going to do, or was there genuine conflict and debate?
Oh, there was intense conflict. We know, for instance, that Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, one of the most respected military and political minds, strongly argued against immediate offensive action.
Umar himself.
Umar himself. His concern was primarily twofold. First, fear of wasting the already scarce military resources against their own people. And second, the possibility of alienating potential allies who might still be brought back through diplomacy and education. He was arguing for patience, for only responding defensively.
That is a very compelling argument, rooted in pure political realism. So how did Abu Bakr overcome such significant opposition from his most trusted advisors?
He didn't just overrule them, that's the key. He persuaded them by grounding his argument exclusively in legal necessity.
Back to law again.
Always back to the law. He reminded them of Case 12, the continuity of the Prophet's law, and Case 10, the definition of their actions as constitutional rebellion. His response to Umar was essentially, if we wait, we are implicitly allowing the law to be optional. Our duty is to enforce the law first, which then allows for diplomacy.
So he transformed the opposition's strategic debate, which was should we fight now, into a constitutional acceptance of we must fight to maintain the law.
Exactly, and this is the key lesson. Consultation legitimizes even the most difficult, violent, and risky decisions. By engaging in a transparent debate rooted in constitutional requirements, he ensured that when the army moved, it moved with the moral and legal consensus of the recognized leadership. It transformed opposition into, at the very least, acceptance of the legal basis for the action.
This process is so essential for modern governance. When an executive decides on a course of national security action, the need for legislative or judicial vetting for deliberation is paramount.
Right.
If the public and their representatives understand the legal rationale, they support the action's legitimacy, even if they disagree with the strategy.
It preserves the social contract. The people understand that force isn't being used out of personal ambition or revenge or caprice. It's being used because a legitimate process determined that the foundational legal integrity of the state was under attack. Consultation elevates power from mere force to legitimate authority.
And that legitimacy is absolutely crucial because now we move into part 3, which defines the constitutional constraints on warfare.
It's not enough to decide to fight. The state must strictly define how it will fight, even against internal rebels. So let's analyze Case 14, proportional response and ethical warfare.
This is one of the most powerful precedents set during this entire period, even in what was effectively a civil war of survival, where the state technically held life or death power over the rebels. The caliph issued incredibly stringent moral and legal instructions to his field generals.
And these weren't just, general platitudes about being nice.
No, not at all.
They were specific prohibitions designed to constrain military action.
They were detailed and they were not negotiable. The source material lists specific groups and actions that were forbidden. For example, do not kill women, children, or the elderly.
The non-combatants.
The clear non-combatants also. Do not destroy trees, particularly fruit-bearing trees, or harm livestock unless necessary for food. And do not harm those who are solely dedicated to worship, like monks or hermits. Let's dwell on that command not to destroy trees and the protection of civilian infrastructure. In a military context, denying your enemy food sources and shelter is standard strategy. Scorched earth tactics. Why did Abu Bakr explicitly forbid that?
Because the war was not a war of foreign conquest, it was a war of restoration.
That's a key distinction.
The goal was to bring these territories back into the Ummah and restore a functioning society. If the army destroyed the agricultural base and killed the non-combatant population, they might win the military conflict, but they would inherit a wasteland populated by deeply resentful survivors.
So the core lesson is that even in war, ethics and law must absolutely govern power.
Yes.
Because the purpose of the state is to serve justice, not merely to dominate. Power has to be constrained by morality, otherwise the state loses its own moral authority.
It established that the means must align with the end. If the end is a just, unified, and stable society, the means cannot be unjust or destructive. This is the explicit foundation for the Islamic tradition's contribution to what we now call international humanitarian law.
The laws of war.
Exactly. The requirement for distinction between combatants and civilians and proportionality in the use of force.
This principle of constraint must have also helped solidify the loyalty of the soldiers themselves, right? Who were fighting people they once considered kin. It gave them a moral framework.
It did. It defined the difference between state action and simple marauding. It told the soldiers, you are instruments of justice, not vengeance. And this leads directly into the next case, case 15, protection of the innocent and the prohibition of collective liability.
How is this implemented in practice? In chaotic warfare, it must be incredibly difficult to differentiate between a civilian sympathizer and an active rebel.
The command was based on physical action and accountability. The armies were ordered to distinguish between those actively bearing arms, the clear combatants, and ordinary civilians, even those living deep within rebellious territories. The burden of proof was placed on the army to identify the perpetrators.
And what was the underlying legal principle driving this extraordinary constraint during a civil war?
It's the foundational principle of divine justice. Justice must never punish the innocent for the guilty.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. If the state achieves victory by punishing an entire tribe or an entire village for the actions of a few rebels, it has fundamentally betrayed its constitutional mandate of justice.
Collective punishment is a historic tactic, though. It's used to subdue large populations quickly, but it always breeds long-term bitterness. Abu Bakr seemed to understand that while it might subdue the current rebellion, it would absolutely guarantee future insurrections.
Absolutely. The lesson is twofold. Collective punishment contradicts justice, and it undermines the long-term legitimacy of the state. If the state acts unjustly, its claims to rule justly are nullified.
If we connect this to modern constitutional thought, this is the prohibition of collective liability. It's the principle that individual guilt must be established through due process. The state cannot use arbitrary power against populations based on mere suspicion or location.
And this constraint is what allows a state, even in the midst of conflict, to maintain the respect and eventually the loyalty of the vanquished. By ensuring justice even for the families of the rebels, the state proves that its mission is law and order, not merely domination. This level of ethical constraint was revolutionary in the context of 7th century warfare.
So, we've covered the definition of the threat, the legal defense of continuity, the internal vetting process, and the external moral constraints on power. We now arrive at Part 4, the culmination of all these constitutional decisions. Case 16, the restoration of national unity.
And the historical result, really, it validates the entire strategy. The crisis that threatened to splinter the entire Arabian Peninsula into warring factions was resolved with remarkable speed. Unity was restored within months.
And the critical aspect that's highlighted in the source material is that this restoration was achieved without chaos or tyranny. It wasn't a brutal conquest that led to a fragile peace. It was a principled restoration.
That is the triumph of law. Principle triumphed over revenge. By consistently adhering to the legal definitions of rebellion in Case 10, enforcing the continuity of law from Case 12, and operating under those strict ethical constraints from Cases 14 and 15, the early Muslim state proved that it could use necessary force while maintaining its highest moral and legal standards.
And this ultimate lesson shows that true leadership heals. It doesn't merely conquer through domination. The peace that followed was built on the foundation of established principle, not just fear of force.
If the peace had been achieved through vengeful, indiscriminate warfare, the unity would have been built on resentment. It would have required constant military occupation. But because the restoration was achieved through constrained, legally justified action, the unified state achieved immediate legitimacy and durability, paving the way for future expansion and stability.
It's a remarkable achievement. Now, let's synthesize these decisions, cases 9 through 16, into the unified constitutional doctrine of unity and legal continuity that Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, left as his legacy.
This doctrine is really a compact blueprint for crisis governance. If we break it down, we can pull out 7 essential foundational points established by his actions during this existential threat.
Okay, let's start with the first principle. What's number 1?
First, unity is the Constitution's first defense. Fragmentation, which he defined as the selective refusal of central legal obligations like zakat, is an unacceptable constitutional failure. It doesn't matter what the local ideological alignment is, the system must be whole to survive.
Second, the principle that allowed the state to survive the death of its founder.
Second, law survives beyond leadership. The established constitution, the operational system of obligations and rights, does not die with the legislator or the ruler. Laws remain binding to ensure predictable governance.
Third, concerning the use of executive power.
Third, consultation legitimizes power. Executive action, especially the decision to use force, must be vetted through robust deliberation, through shura. This transforms necessary force from unilateral ambition into a constitutional mandate.
Fourth, related to the conduct of the state itself, how it behaves.
Fourth, ethical conduct defines legitimacy. The state cannot abandon its moral and ethical principles even during intense conflict. The methods used reflect the foundational justice of the state.
Fifth, the protection of the people.
Fifth, justice protects both state and citizen. The explicit prohibition on collective punishment ensures that the state maintains its moral authority and does not punish the innocent for the actions of the guilty.
Sixth, refining the rules of engagement.
Sixth, war, when necessary, must remain moral. The detailed constraints on warfare protecting civilians, vulnerable groups, and key infrastructure like agriculture, these are not optional. They are constitutional necessities ensuring long-term peace.
And finally, the ultimate aim of the entire struggle.
And seventh, peace is achieved through principle, not force. Military victory has to lead to the restoration of a just order based on law, not merely the subjugation of a populace through fear.
That is a profound and comprehensive set of principles established under the highest possible stress. It demonstrates an understanding of statecraft and constitutional stability that, it just belies the youth of the state itself.
It truly does. Abu Bakr proved that constitutional unity is maintained not primarily by military might, though that was required, but by unwavering adherence to the rule of law, meticulous consultation, and unshakable faith in those legal and ethical principles.
Right.
When the framework is solid and consistently applied, the state can withstand the greatest internal threats imaginable.
What an incredible lesson in crisis management and governance under extreme duress. When the political environment screened for disintegration and fear dictated compromise, one man's commitment to principle preserved the entire structure.
Abu Bakr As-Siddiq, may Allah be pleased with him, demonstrated that a state built on law and faith can achieve a unity that outlasts every rebellion and every constitutional storm.
That is a fantastic point to end on for this extensive deep dive into cases 9 through 16. We've covered everything from the legal definition of zakat refusal to the ethical constraints on destroying trees in warfare.
It's a complex tapestry, but once you identify those constitutional threads, the necessity of his actions becomes crystal clear.
And it leaves us with a provocative final thought for you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive concludes. What happens to modern constitutional states when their leaders prioritize short-term political expediency? Popular approval, tactical gains, avoiding conflict over foundational legal continuity, and the consistent application of their supreme law.
When the Constitution becomes optional, the state risks dissolving into fragmentation, just as Arabia threatened to do 14 centuries ago. It's a question for every citizen and every leader today.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We covered a lot of constitutional and historical ground today.
The material here is so rich and rewarding for anyone interested in the foundational challenges of state formation.
And if you are keen to continue this analysis of early Islamic crisis leadership, please join us for our next deep dive. We will be moving into cases 17 through 24, where we will explore emergency leadership and moral courage. How Abu Bakr managed the subsequent ongoing internal crises, including famine, disease, and the constant threat of external invasion, with serenity, faith, and uncompromising justice.
That will focus heavily on the practical, day-to-day decisions required to solidify the state and transition from a war footing back to permanent governance. You won't want to miss it.
Until then, stay curious and keep digging deeper into the sources.